Hi, welcome to a special live edition of Ilanomics. We are doing this Ilanomics this week on Thursday and not Friday as we normally do because there has been a major announcement by the government today. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced a fresh series of economic stimulus for the economy. But before we go to the discussion with Professor Patnaik, I would first of all want to wish all our viewers a very happy Diwali. We need to have a good festival and festivities this time because we all know the kind of year 2020 has been. So, my hearty greetings to you from my side and from all my colleagues at ThePrint and from Professor Ila Patnaik. And this is also a time for us to make a Diwali appeal. Diwali, is a time to give and share. We all, give gifts and, wish our well-wishers well, friends, relatives. And this is an occasion I want to remind you that good dehyphenated journalism also needs your blessings and your wishes. And that translates into support in the form of subscriptions. Please visit our website and go to theprint.in/subscribe because like I have discussed it before, the media is going through a very bad patch, and as the economy begins to show signs of a green patch or green shoots, the media also needs to pick up the baton and be able to revive itself, and for that it needs your support, it needs subscriptions. So do subscribe to the good dehyphenated journalism the print is striving to do. The announcements by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman today were a huge Diwali stimulus. It was the third in this series announced by the Modi government since the beginning of the pandemic. There were some small announcements yesterday when they said 1.46 lakh crore rupees scheme was announced for 10 sectors in terms of productivity linked incentives. Today, there was another multi-sectoral announcement and almost a dozen new measures. I mean, there are many highlights, and I will not go into all the highlights. The finance minister and her junior finance minister, Anurag Thakur, held forth on it for almost 2 hours. Uh, Basically, stimulus like in equity in the NIIF debt platform, IT relief for home buyers, PM Awas Yojana, the urban platform got about 18,000 crores above what was given in the budget. Extension of the 3 lakh crore emergency credit line guarantee scheme, which was announced earlier. A boost for manufacturing production linked incentives, which is what was announced yesterday. Uh, Relaxation of performance security on contracts. A lot of new steps were announced to create employment, job guarantees, subsidies for companies which create employment, and the help for MSMEs and business enterprises, and even individual loans for business purposes. So I'd like to straight away go to Ila and ask her, Ila, uh, what is your first reaction to the series of announcements the finance minister made today?
I think it was a recognition of the fact that now that we have unlocked the economy in most sectors, there is already unlocking. And in the other sectors, the unlocking is currently underway. Like in aviation, every day the limits of their capacity that they can carry are being increased. In that situation, perhaps more needs to be done to boost production and jobs than was already done. She had in the earlier package said that we will do more when the time comes. And I think now, when production data has started coming in, it was felt that yes, more needs to be done. The second thing I felt was that these are not just demand boosting measures. So, a lot of people had earlier proposed that they should just simply increase demand. I think the second important aspect of this package was that it was an understanding that perhaps if we just boost demand, then a lot of that demand will go to imports. And imports from China is not something that we are looking at. So, in the production linked incentives, while there is attempt to do food processing and so on as well, but there is also an attempt to, I think, reduce our dependence for inputs on China and Chinese imports. And part of, whether it's electronics, pharmaceuticals, whether it is mobile telephony, telecom, various sectors where you see that sense of trying to push things which, if we had just given a demand boost, would have perhaps just meant a higher import bill and imported from China.
Mhm.
I think it was a very complex sort of exercise. It must have taken a lot of thinking. And of course, the finance minister's job is a very difficult one. She keeps getting inputs every day. So we'd heard this thing about urban Manrega and how you should just give people jobs. And, as we discussed last week, it would have been not a very good policy. And even in the short run, kind of enrolling people, getting them on board would have all meant stretching state capacity to beyond what it is. Whereas what this package tries to do is, for example, when the government says we'll give 25% of the salary wages for new employees, then that does support the economy. It's a subsidy to producers, it lowers their costs. Yet at the same time, it is not a very new way of giving money out. So, you already have the EPFO, and that's where the money will go in. So, you're putting a subsidy without stretching state capacity too much. Again, supporting production rather than simply supporting demand, which would have, fitted away into a higher import bill. So I thought that given the constraints that we have, given the low state capacity that we have, given the limited fiscal space that she has to work with, that she's mainly tried to do things where uh, the steps that she's taken are likely to be more effective than just big announcements. Um, that's my first reaction.
Yeah. Ilan, what do you have to say about the timing? Because if you saw the headlines over the last few days, and especially today, it's been about auto sales going up in October. People, I believe, want to travel now, maybe take domestic holidays because you can't go abroad so easily now. There is a revival in home loans, we are told. GST collections in October were 10% higher year on year. Bank credit improved by 5.1%. And if you remember, we were talking about a week or two back about how some analysts were saying that the timing is right now for the government to think of both monetary and fiscal steps to boost the economy. Do you think this announcement yesterday and today has got the timing right?
Yeah, I think that the fact that economic activity is coming back, uh, the fact that what we had done earlier, the lockdown, was actually almost mechanically closing the economy down. So what you're seeing now with the numbers that you've just cited, as well as the GST numbers, which tell you that the production is back on track. The basically, when you remove that extreme physical restraint that if there's a lockdown and you can't do anything, then the economy had to come back. So it was almost a mechanical thing. But I think what is being seen now is that it is coming back, and yet perhaps it's not come back to the extent that you would like it to. So
Mhm,
you do want to push it a little bit more. So,
mhm,
we've been talking about roughly the same, or most people have had estimates of this year a contraction of -10 to -15%.
mhm,
And now what you're seeing is that people are marginally reducing the contraction.
mhm,
So, from 8.6 to a little below,
mhm,
or from 9.6 to 8.9 and things like that.
mhm.
But
That was Moody's
essentially,
today.
yeah, so essentially it is that mechanical thing of lockdown has gone, that the
Mhm,
economy has started picking up. We are
mhm,
seeing it in the numbers, but perhaps not as much as we would like it to. And that is the reason why this is the time to give stimulus. It's also Diwali.
mhm,
So it's a time when you can encourage people to spend, when saying
mhm,
that, okay, use your LTC instead for Diwali, or we'll give you a Diwali advance,
mhm,
or you people do spend. There's a sharp spike, and we see that seasonality year after year in
mhm,
production and sales data. So
mhm,
it is a time to spend. Of course, this time, you want people to spend, but you don't want them to go to crowded markets,
mhm, mhm.
but you do want them to spend, and you could push that. So I mean, it's a good time in both those ways.
But can we be sure that this is not just pent-up demand coming back because of the lockdown, Ila, and then there is a fear that they might just, decline again in the next few weeks?
So some of the data that we're looking at is showing an increase year on year.
Mhm,
To the extent that we are looking at that data, that it has we are comparing October this year to October last year,
mhm,
then because income has gone up, people do have money, people are not spending as much as they might spend on many discretionary items like
mhm.
cinemas, or going out, or
Eating
events,
out. Mhm,
yeah, travel. So people are spending on a different set of things. So we've seen car sales improve. I think some of those things may sustain, because once the COVID crisis is over, and once we get back on track, then there is little reason for that demand to fall.
mhm,
But we still have to be cautious, because as I said, when we see the crisis over, it's not over yet. It's not over yet, and we still have to be cautious. So my sense is, because the economy is primarily a private sector economy. I
mhm,
mean, most of the production does take place in the private sector, that we're not that dependent on government. We should be able to recover. I'm optimistic.
mhm, mhm. What are your thoughts on production-linked incentives? Do they work, Ila? Because earlier they announced it for three sectors, which was largely for smartphones and electronics and specific electronics. And now they have expanded production-linked incentives to 10 sectors. I mean, the auto sector gets the biggest share of these incentives. And then there are automobile components, textile products, white goods like LED screens, processed food, products. Do these things work?
The experience for things like this is mixed. The evidence is mixed. Now, in some situations, you might actually find that the sectors get an initial push, and then if you close those schemes down, the sector becomes competitive. But very often, when you have something that you do on the basis of it being an infant industry, and then you forget, the infant becomes an old man, and over the years you don't take those incentives away, then usually this industry, because it is either subsidized or behind protective walls, it becomes inefficient. So it really depends on how long we give these incentives for. Normally
Mhm,
that is the case, but I think in this case, there are two kinds of, broadly, I know I'm simplifying, there are broadly two kinds of industries we're talking about. One in which India does have a comparative advantage, where we're already doing well, auto components, or if it is sectors like food processing, where actually, maybe we are one of the best placed in the world to be a leader in that, given our climate, given our labor supply, given our crafts, given our skills, sorry. We could be a world leader there, but where we don't have the regulatory framework, we don't have the markets, we don't have the investment. So it could be that a sector where we either have competitive advantage, or we have the potential to become a world leader. There, if handled well, a little push can help. What I'm worried about is the sectors where actually China has a competitive advantage. And if China has that advantage because it is subsidizing its industry, then yes, we could try to compete with counter subsidy. But if China has that advantage because there are increasing returns to scale, and China has pretty much become the factory of the world, for manufacturing, then it's going to be an uphill battle. And let's see how domestic industry fares, responds to those incentives, how bureaucratic or not bureaucratic the whole scheme becomes. And it'll depend on a lot on the detail on the ground.
Ila, we have a lot of viewers asking us questions, and I really thank viewers to tuning in and logging into YouTube and watching this special live edition. We'll take our first question from Konark Singhal. Uh, Thank you, Konark. The question is, how will you, Ila, characterize the government's handling of the economy before and after the pandemic hit us? And I would like to just add here that, we tend to, or generally people tend to forget that we already had a very bad slowdown even before the economy and even before the pandemic. And the pandemic only made it so much more worse. So, how would you characterize the government handling the economy before and after? Is Konark's question.
See, when I look back at the economy before the pandemic, it was an economy that needed reforms, not just reforms for small things that were done yesterday or day before, but reforms for things that needed to be done, that had been in place for 70 years. So, for example, domination of the banking sector by public sector banks. Banks were nationalized by Indira Gandhi. For example, agricultural laws, which were made in the 50s. Uh, India not having a bankruptcy code, India having an inefficient tax system. Now, any government would have suffered if it tried to bring in a GST. Okay. So if it was a UPA government, another some other Mili Juli Sarkar, if it was an NDA government, whatever government it would have been, if it had the majority to push a reform like a GST through, then given how deep this goes, it would have suffered. Now, having said that, part of the problem was also that investment had slowed down. And it's not easy to push investment up. So initially, for 14, 15 or so, for a year or so, we saw investment come up. So it had been going down since 2011, 12, and it came up a little because of the enthusiasm. But I think the deep seated problems in the economy take too much to solve. It takes both political will, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time. You can't do it all together. It doesn't help to do all the reforms at one time, also because our state capacity is limited. So I think the handling of the economy was limited by these two factors.
Mhm.
One, the need for long term reform, and whatever you did, because these were such big deep seated reforms that you could only do them slowly and you could only do them one at a time. And second, because of our bureaucratic and say state structures, that there is very limited state capacity, and yet there is a lot of red tapeism and
Mhm.
discretionary power. So those combined together uh, made the handling of the economy, if you want to call it that, in the immediate sense, a very difficult and challenging battle. Now, after COVID, in fact, I've been one of the few supporters of. I'm glad you're not spending too much, because all these things, all these good things that we see today and we are celebrating today might not have happened if right in the beginning you had done a 10-15% big increase in spending. Interest rates would have gone up, private sector would not be able to borrow. For all we know, the rupee would have depreciated because there would have been a sense of macroeconomic instability. So I think that after that, going slow, being cautious, So I'm only talking about handling of the economy. I'm not talking about the migration crisis
Mhm,
or
mhm.
various other issues, but just the handling of the economy. And I think that after that, that cautious approach has been the right approach.
The cautious approach has been the right approach. We have Tarush, our regular viewer. Thank you, Tarush, for tuning in again today, and thank you for your questions. I like your second question more, Tarush, so I will pose that one. Uh, what will happen to the economy if the government decides to go for another lockdown, like what Europe is witnessing?
Very disastrous, I think. I'm scared to even think of another lockdown in our conditions. Uh, I hope we don't have to go there,
Mhm, mhm,
because just shutting everyone down in their homes, and people have already lost their capacity to uh, be able to survive without work and without being able to go out. So I think it
mhm.
would be a disastrous situation if there was a second lockdown.
This one is from Manish KS. Why doesn't Nirmala Sitharaman remove income tax and deregulation on land and labor reform?
Yeah, uh, all these are big hairy questions. So removing income tax would mean that you could perhaps think of doing that if you had a very good consumption tax in place. A consumption tax is a GST. A GST is effectively a tax on consumption. But do we have that in place already? No. A very large part of the economy is in the informal sector. So you're not really being able to tax all consumption. I don't think any finance minister, let alone in the midst of a pandemic, would do such a big reform. And I think it would be, I mean, normally, yes, there are very good arguments in favor of removing income tax. But in the midst of a crisis, when you need to support other sectors, when there needs to be distribution, where you're unsure about production, where you don't know how much your GST collections will be, when you can't even, where you're going to miss your disinvestment targets, I don't think that this is something I would have advised the finance minister to do, remove income tax in the midst of a pandemic.
Mhm. Parimal A, another very regular viewer, Ila, he says, ma'am, what are your thoughts on the recent term premier debate between Professor Verma and Dr. Patra in the MPC? Did you track that debate, Ila?
No, I am not tracking it.
I'm sorry, Parimal, we will have to pass that question. We will probably try and answer it in one of our future Ilanomics. Uh, this is a question from an account which says mail to Raj Rao. How do you see the banking sector performing in 2021?
I would be very scared of the health of the banking sector in 2021, because 2020 has been a year of a pandemic where a lot of businesses have been operating below capacity. Their revenues have fallen. A lot of them may be in trouble and may not be able to repay their loans. And for that, if loans start going bad, the health of the banking sector gets affected. They have to either come up with more equity, or they have to start contracting their balance sheets. So I think we're going to see difficult times for the banking sector next year.
Mhm, mhm. Prashant Tripathi wants to know if the auto sector is going to boom because some of the forecasts that have been made, and this is not what he is saying, I'm just adding to his question, that because of the pandemic and people's fear of public transport, a lot of people will go back to their own transport, and those who don't have their own transport will invest in two-wheelers, small cars, so that they can commute to work or whatever else on their own and not depend on public transport.
Let me give you an economist answer on the one hand and on the other. So while on the one hand, he's absolutely right that people will want more vehicles of their own so that they don't go and use public transport if they are scared. But on the other hand, it also depends on how much purchasing power they have. So vehicle sales is often a very good indicator of growth in incomes and economic activity. And it would be a very good sign for the economy if there is a sustained increase in demand for vehicles. Not good for the environment, but as an indicator of what's happening in the
Mhm.
economy, it would be a good sign. But considering a 25% contraction in GDP in the first quarter, another contraction in the second, and overall the year's GDP roughly down by 10%, it really depends on who has been hit. So the distribution is very important. If salaried people have not been hit so much, then they could have seen higher demand. So I think those two factors will balance out. So overall, let's wait and see.
Although I personally think there should have been some GST rebate given to the auto sector, at least for a temporary 6 months, 1 year period, to make it an incentive for people to buy two-wheelers, cars, whatever you want to say. Gagan Chaturvedi, what do you think is the impact or the fiscal impact of today's announcements, today's current stimulus announcements?
YP, we'll have to work that out. I'm
Skip
sure
one.
Ramya
Yeah,
is busy
it's a
working
lot
it
of
out
math.
and she'll be writing about it.
Uh, Saurabh Mate, his question is: will free trade agreements with Europe, Australia, and the Middle Eastern countries and other friendly countries help accelerate economic growth? And I just want to, add to this question and say that this weekend at the ASEAN summit, the virtual summit that is going to take place, the RCEP Asia Pacific Free Trade Pact is going to be signed. 15 countries are going to sign it without India because India has concerns. So, what do you have to say to Saurabh?
Usually what we find is that when an FTA is signed, it leads more to trade diversion rather than anything else. And we might have some benefits for some time, signing a trade treaty with a particular country, but at least what the evidence suggests is that it doesn't have too many long term benefits. And instead, what doesn't sound intuitively very attractive, what does work is unilateral cuts in tariffs by a country. And that's not something that we're doing.
There is a question. We'll take two last questions, Ela, and then we've already running out of time. Surinder Arunachalam asks if crude prices go up, crude oil prices go up, how bad will it be for the economy, or can the Indian economy survive higher crude prices? I think we are running only on the tax on fuels.
Yeah, so I mean, I think your thinking is right that at the moment, what we've been doing is that whenever prices fell, we actually increased the tax so that the tax collections were what kept the exchequer going. And if fuel prices rise, we cannot afford to let the tax remain the same,
Mhm,
because then we would have, it'll become too expensive and feed into inflation. Uh, Also, given the way people are at the moment, real incomes will fall and won't be particularly popular at the moment. While on the other, if you do start cutting taxes when fuel prices rise, then you would hit the exchequer. So it's going to be a difficult call once if that happens.
mhm. Last question, Ela. Kushal Jaisinghani asks, do you think handling of the economy can be better with more talented people joining the government?
I'm sure the government has very talented people, and people who are outside the government don't actually have to join government
Mhm,
for the economy to be handled well, because mostly decisions about the economy are political decisions.
mhm,
I mean, yes, there are times when economic reforms like financial sector reforms are being done, when a very expert team at the Ministry of Finance and the Department of Economic Affairs that leads it, or when there are reforms like GST, and that, when they are being done, that's when bureaucrats matter. But, other than certain roles that the bureaucracy has, I think primarily the rest of it is political decisions.
mhm. Thank you, Ela. Thanks a lot for those many answers to all the questions. And we would like to conclude this special edition of Ilanomics today. And once again, I would like to wish all our viewers and your families a very happy Diwali. But stay safe. This is not the time to go out and crowd public places. And hopefully, we will go back to a normal Diwali next year. Thank you very much.